I now move on to Bambos. Charalambous.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision for or in connection with the relief of debts of certain developing countries. Debt remains a huge cause for concern for low-income countries in the wake of the COVID pandemic and following inflation rises for food and fuel. 34% of African countries spend more on external debt payments than they do on their entire healthcare and or education budgets. According to a report from the Send My Friend to School Coalition, across low-income countries, debt servicing or net interest payments accounts for 60% of education expenditure. The latest figures for Africa show that the total external debt serviced by all African countries in 2024 was $104 billion, and over 45% of that amount, $47 billion, is owed to private creditors. To put this into perspective, the entire UK budget to Africa in 2024, for UK aid to Africa in 2024, was £993 million, or less than 1/100th of what African countries owe in external debt. To use a specific example, this year the Kenyan government will spend $5.149 billion on external debts, of which $2.981 billion go towards external debt payments to commercial creditors. The UK provides Kenya with £45 million of aid. UK aid is in effect going towards helping service the debt. At a time when we've seen overseas development aid cut from 0.7% to 0.5%, we need to have an overview of the contribution that aid makes and not just see this aid in isolation. If we're truly serious about ensuring the UK aid goes further, then debt relief from private creditors has to be addressed. The G20 have identified debt as a problem for developing countries and have taken some steps to address this. In November 2020, the G20 created the Common Framework for Debt Treatment beyond the Debt Service Suspension Initiative. The intention of the Common Framework was to allow low-income countries with unsustainable debt to use the framework to obtain debt relief, including from private creditors. Although well-intentioned, the Common Framework has been ineffective because it has no teeth. Private creditors have been unwilling to participate, and there is no process to ensure their participation. Consequently, while governments were negotiating debt relief with low-income countries, private creditors were just going through the motions. An example of this is the in-principle agreements that Zambia made with private creditors that would have meant that they would have been paid a third more than government creditors, including the UK and China. Needless to say, the government creditors vetoed this deal on the basis that there was no equal treatment of creditors, as required by the Common Framework, leaving Zambia in limbo. The 4 countries who requested debt treatment under the Common Framework experienced lengthy delays and a long drawn-out process with very little to show for all the time and effort spent on trying to obtain debt relief. Critics suggest that the failings of the Common Framework have been due to a lack of enforcement, a lack of a mechanism to coordinate creditors, a lack of transparent debt reporting, and an inability to prevent litigation and holdout behaviour from creditors. The fact that only Chad, Zambia, Ghana and Ethiopia have used the Common Framework and that none have seen any debt counselled from private creditors has shown how ineffective the Common Framework is and has put off other countries from applying. Despite the G20 governments and the International Monetary Fund urging private creditors to cooperate, the G20 have not offered low-income countries the tools they need to bring the private creditors to the table to negotiate debt treatment. And there is urgent need for a mechanism that will ensure that both governments and private creditors share the burden equally when restructuring debt with low-income countries, and this is something that the UK can help with. The UK can play a big role in overcoming the delays and bureaucracy caused by the Common Framework and also deliver on equal treatment of creditors. In doing so, it will deliver debt justice for low-income countries and do what the G20 intended. So how could this be done? 90% of debt of the low-income countries eligible to apply to the Common Framework is governed by English law. This bill will compel private creditors to actively participate in the debt relief process by preventing them from suing for more than they would get if they accepted debt relief on the same terms as other lenders. Knowing that they could not get more than government creditors, this would also have the effect of encouraging private creditors to reach a quicker settlement rather than drag their heels as they have been doing under the Common Framework, and some might say acting in bad faith in doing so. If successful, this process could lead to more applications from the low-income countries than the paltry 4 that the Common Framework has received to date, and this could unlock billions for low-income countries to spend on their health and education systems, and at the same time not cost the Treasury a single penny. For those who are sceptical as to whether this can be done or not, then I can point to a precedent. In 2010, the UK passed similar legislation, the Debt Relief Developing Countries Act, which started off as a private member's bill introduced by my good friend, the Honourable Member for Gorton and Denton. The Debt Relief Developing Countries Act 2010 compelled private creditors to participate in debt relief under the now outdated, heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative. A subsequent government review in 2011, led by the coalition government, found the legislation to have been a success and to have had no adverse impact on the UK economy. My bill will update the 2010 Act, strengthen certain measures and make it applicable to the current G20 Common Framework. This bill will reduce the burden of debt for the poorest countries and help overcome the ineffectiveness of the G20 Common Framework. It will also prevent future debt crises by deterring risky lending. There is much more that can be done to strengthen the Common Framework, such as introducing legal automatic suspension of payments when a country applies to the Common Framework, as is the norm when big corporations deal with corporate debt restructuring, but that is outside the scope of my bill and is perhaps something that ministers can take up directly with the G20. Next year will be the 25th anniversary of Jubilee 2000 campaign, which sought debt forgiveness for low-income countries and which saw over $100 billion of debt cancelled for the 35 poorest countries in the world. We need to repeat that success so that the savings from debt cancellation can go towards funding health and education programmes in low-income countries. With 3.3 billion people living in countries that spend more on debt servicing than on health or education, the time to act is now. Countries seeking debt relief are also experiencing extreme weather events due to climate change. Last year, Zambia had its most severe flooding for over 50 years, with over 25,000 households affected, and right now it's experiencing its worst drought in 40 years, with 50% of this year's crops lost, with 2024 on track to be the hottest year on record. Zambia is suffering despite only contributing just 0.01% of global greenhouse emissions since the Industrial Revolution. Although Zambia has sought debt relief from its largest private creditor, the creditor has refused to cancel the amount the International Monetary Fund has said is necessary to make the debt sustainable. This behaviour is typical of the behaviour of private creditors towards low-income countries. It's everyone's responsibility to ensure that countries like Zambia get the debt justice that they deserve, and it is imperative upon us to take action now. Before I conclude, I want to thank the organisations that have provided me with the invaluable advice and support in preparing this bill and who have been championing the cause of debt relief for many years. Those organisations are Christian Aid, CAFOD and Debt Justice, and I also wish to thank the Send My Friend to School Coalition and the House of Commons Library for some of the statistics used in my speech today. I hope this bill will go some way to helping secure debt relief for low-income countries and allow the money saved to be reinvested in health and education systems for those who need the investment the most, and also to tackle the effects of climate change, as in the case of Zambia. It is morally the right thing to do, the just thing to do, and the compassionate thing to do. I hope this bill will receive the support it deserves and needs. Thank you.
Now that the member for Southgate and Wood Green has moved the motion for his 10-minute rule bill, the question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as are opinions say aye. Aye. Many of that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring the bill?
Sarah Champion, Alice MacDonald, Sam Rushworth, David Taylor, Laura Kirk-Smith, Gordon McKee, Chris Law, Ellie Chowns, Liz Saville-Roberts, Tonya Toniazzi, Joe Platt, and myself.
Bambos, Charalambous.
Debt Relief Developing Countries Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 14th of March, 2025.
Friday, the 14th of March, 2025. Well done, congratulations. We now go on to the next portion of the business. Ministers want to quickly swap over, I take it?